Hey everybody, I'm Ross Treelevin, and this is another Sprague Spotlight interview. Today I'm joined with the legendary, the infamous Bob Andrews. Bob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm known throughout the company by many names, which some people call me Bob, some call me Bobby, some call me Robert. The boys in Spokane used to call me, and Boise too. I used to be known as Bobo for some reason. I think that's to distinguish us from the other Bobs and things. As far as introductions go, I've been with the company a long time, and I have a few things to say, so I might as well get out of the way right now. With Ross and some of the other people in the company, I've known them their whole lives. But I think that's enough of an introduction from me. You can ask questions, Ross, if you want, because I don't want to embarrass anybody because I know they're doctors and things that used to be my roommates in college and other things. So you got to be nice to everybody because you don't know who knows who.
I totally agree with you, Bobby. Now, you started here what year?
1979.
1979. So, who hired you?
I was hired by your grandfather, Bob Treelevin, which isn't his real name, but he told the nuns that's what he wanted to be called to for some reason. And also, your dad was at the company then too. And so were some of the other folks that are on the wall. And they worked here a long time also. Some of them are retired, some of them still work here. So when you visit that wall, there's a lot of people on the front wall that still work here, and there's a lot going down the stairs that still work here. We're a company that's has a lot of longevity in it, and you can strive to be that person too. Because as I learned from Ross's grandfather, our job is to take care of the customer. And some of these other things, even though if we seem to sweat a lot of it, it comes down to that. We have enough support now that if you can take care of the customer, which is the way it used to be too, and if you have trouble with other ends and things like that, we have enough other people that can help you out with that. But I don't know what the goal is of a talk like this. But I think my goal is, as someone like me that's been with the company a long time, utilize us as a resource. If you're not sure about if it'll work or if it's been tried before, call me. If I've seen a lot of things go wrong, seen a lot of things go right. What seems to be old is new again, type of a thing. But other than that, Ross, you're going to have to shoot me a lot of questions because I'll talk about this stuff for 40 years.
Well, let's get started. Now, I never really got to know my grandfather very well because unfortunately he passed away when I was 7. So I never got to work for him either. What was he like to work with?
Well, he was fantastic. Matter of fact, at the different clients, I would name names, but we're not supposed to. But we had a big brewery client, and a lot of other places that I would have to follow him. And they were a little bit nervous about it, but they when he brought me around and said I was a college kid and said things like he didn't just eat the books, they really were a little cautious, especially at the brewery. They said we liked it better when the owner of the company was taking care of us. Whereas if he showed me another location, it was in the same town. This is Olympia, Washington, and it was an apartment complex, and the people there were what I would consider my age now, and they liked me because I wasn't quite as fast as him because sometimes they'd come, we'd knock on the door and go right in, and they'd say things like, "Oh, I like you better." The other guy would come in and I wouldn't even be dressed. Sometimes he goes, "That's okay. I have a lot of children. I've seen lots of people undressed." Things. But working for your grandfather, we used to inspect a lot of houses. And what we did before we could even do pest control, we had a construction arm. So we had to do things like dig out houses, put in crawl space vents, rip out the rot, um, things like that on homes we inspected before we could treat them and even become in the pest control end. But my favorite thing was when people say bed bugs are new and all this other stuff. That's where we started our office. Many of you have seen the car. down there. In the car is a picture of our old building. That is the car from 1940. It's a 49 Plymouth, and I do believe the picture, because there's a lot of snow on the ground, was from 1950. But that office evolved. It became an office for your grandfather. Whereas when I started back in the day, we used to back the trucks up to it and fill it full of furniture and various other things. And we used to fumigate items for bed bugs. And then Goodwill got closer, so we didn't have to do it so often. One of our things, because they sell used stuff, the political control for those in those days was we had to, your dad gave me this, but your grandfather supervised it. We fumigated. My job was to tag all the beds and all the furniture. It was a law. You've seen it on there. Don't remove for penalty of law. Well, we had the same thing for fumigation. Before they could sell used furniture, it had to be tagged, and that was a health ordinance. And so when people say they've done a lot of bed bug jobs and treated more bedding than anybody in the company, I think I could challenge them, maybe even in the first year. It wasn't uncommon we had our own fumigation vaults down at the biggest furniture stores, secondhand stores. They didn't even drive up here. We used to go to them and do a lot of fumigation. So I've seen a lot of things change. You're not going to shock me if you're from another company that we just purchased and things by how you do things. I've probably seen it, probably done it. One of the, when your uncle introduced me to, when Alfie introduced me to at the Seattle office one time, he's told him how old I was, and also that I was pretty well versed in chemicals. And someone come up to me and said, I bet you've even used Lindane and Chlordane. Well, I used to actually not only use it, I used to make some of that stuff. Your grandfather taught me how to make up the rodent bait. We had our own rodent bait. We followed our own formula, of course, by manufacturer's recommendations. They had labels even back then. But that might be a little bit too much background. But I also had a chicken farm clients. I had 20 of them. So I used to, just for them, I'd have to mix up over 1,000 pounds of bait a month just to service them. Wow. So I had to watch out with your dad, though, because he'd give me new people to train. And if I took them to the chicken farm, sometimes they quit.
So
you dodged the bullet, buddy. You dodged a bullet.
Well, that was the old cement mixer, wasn't it? The old putting everything.
We actually had two cement mixers, and we had at that time Ed Atchison too. Mm-hmm. But we started out with a nice commercial grade. Always when I started, it was enough to make about 200 pounds, but it was a big dough mixer, just like you see in the commercial bakeries, and that's what we used first. We still had that one, but we had to institute cement mixers too. Yes.
Wow. Making your own bait, learning all these things on the fly. It must have been a different time.
Well, Western Chemical or Western Insecticide over there in Spokane, a lot of things. We were sister companies, and they actually started together. So we did a lot of the same things. And but the most interesting thing for me was back then we had our own brand of pesticides. We had the WB Sprague fly aerosols. We had some other things. And when I went to Spokane and when we rejoined the companies together, because they split way back in the 30s, basically in the 20s actually. But when we got back together, there was some of that name brand stuff again. That you run into some stuff I hadn't seen for years. So it's pretty interesting.
So, Bob, your past before Sprague is a little eclectic. I've heard lots of rumors. Some of them are probably even true.
Yeah, but I try to lie about my past.
Well, then set the story straight, even if it's crooked. What is all the table tennis talk about your past?
Well, that's one thing I found out. I still am fairly active. I do it as a hobby. I have to call it a hobby according to the IRS because I don't make any money to make any claims. But I'm a table tennis equipment supplier and things like that. So if you need any t-shirts with my company name on it, call me. I'll give you one, probably at least the first one. And I used to be quite active and play throughout the United States and some foreign countries too. I was even lucky enough to play in some foreign tournaments, and during halftime games I was lucky enough to play against top players in say the halftime of several college games. But my favorite was the Harlem Globetrotters because we would bring out some nationally known players, at least in my circles. And I always got to play, like Richard Bergman was 5 times world champion. I got to play him, but he was pretty fun. I learned all my trick stuff from him. So I was lucky enough, especially when they had the Forrest Gump thing happened. I lived that life. When Forrest Gump played table tennis, that's a true thing from history. That's the friendship games with China. But when they came here, I always got picked to play the Chinese, like at PLU several times because they had several foreign students there. Western Washington University, even at your alma mater, they asked me that. I said, no, that's too far. They call them the friendship matches because they cut me a little slack most of the time. Because when I played them in tournaments, I noticed, hey, I hadn't, yeah, we're at a different level here. So.
Were they?
Table tennis is not a lie. I'm one of these days I'll have to show you my robot and maybe all my trophies if I didn't throw them all away. But I used to make a lot of money being a supplier, and we'd go from town to town, and we'd take all challengers and we'd give them a gift certificate to the local sporting goods stores if they could beat me. I usually start out with 19 points, and so they only had to get 2 points. But the parents never won. I always let the kids win. So most of the time that the kids can win, the parents will play like 30 games in a row at $5 a pop. So we made a lot of money for our table tennis club that way.
Wow. So you would spot them 19 points and still beat them.
Yeah, it's not that hard. Especially if you serve first, it's pretty easy. It's really not that hard. We've had a lot of these matches and tournaments where they're handicapped, just like in golf. You play somebody, you play one game to 51. I've had to play against people in some of these tavern tournaments where I had to give them literally 45 points. And I started out, I got 0, and they only have to make it to 51. And those games were done through Boeing. And you have to be careful. And this comes back to who you know. Like Jeff Weir one time gave me some bad news. A friend of mine, she moved to this country when she was 19, and her brother and her dad, they were in our table tennis club. We played in the Boeing League. And she ended up marrying one of the gentlemen in there, Peter Ansdale. And you guys don't know him, but then one day, Jeff, he knew things about me I just couldn't understand. And then he told me when she died, her name was Jenny Chu. And I didn't understand it, but that's when I found out that Jeff's wife worked with Jenny. No wonder I used to inspect ships and all this other stuff. And all of a sudden Jenny said, how come you don't inspect the ships? We only want to use some of them. But Jeff controlled that. So that's
funny.
But when he told me she passed away, that was the first time I heard about it. I didn't understand how he found out before me, but now I do. I know.
So if you go back to 1979, what were the confluence of events that brought you to Sprague? How did you end up at Sprague and doing pest control?
Well, my background is in biology, and I even have my pictures taken in the newspaper and things with the butterfly net. And I used to have a college T-shirt in there, but I didn't look like a typical. Had a big beard, and I had more than 2 hairs back then, and I really was interested in insects, and that was one of the few jobs that seemed to apply to me that were entry level. And I had a summer job with the Pierce County Health Department type of thing, and I kept applying there, but never could get on full time. And I worked at some of the places that Sprague went to, and I applied first where Jeff Miller worked, and as well as Jeff Weir. They worked for a gentleman, another old timer named Claude Weaver, and I thought that was a pretty good thing to do. So, and the first people that I met were not your grandfather and your dad, but I met Claude Weaver and a few other people, and I decided that the way your grandfather and your dad treated me, that this seemed to be the best fit because of even though these other companies were family run too, that because of the values I was learning from your grandfather, just talking to him for a few minutes, I decided it was no contest for me, because no offense to the people that I've met Jeff Miller while he was there, but he doesn't remember me. I don't think Jeff Weir worked there yet, but even though he started at that company, and but when I went to these other companies, since they thought I was some kind of super bug man, all instead of just talking to me and saying, "Hey, this is our company, this is what we provide," all of a sudden they just brought me hordes of insects to identify. I don't know if they didn't know what they were or if it was some kind of test, because I still remember Claude Weaver gives me a bunch of Teniola moths. They were web spinner clothes moths. I go, "Well, they look like little web spinners." He goes, "No, there's some kind of moth." I'm going, "Yeah, that's true. These are the," but like I said, I didn't know if it was a test or he really didn't know what they were. Because when we go to state association meetings, that's one thing. We're there's always somebody from our company to all these meetings, the national ones and stuff. And I was lucky enough to represent our company throughout the years to all of them. I got to meet our senators and and all the governors, because I worked in Olympia, and one of my accounts was the governor's mansion. So I was lucky enough to meet all the political people over the years. And you heard about table tennis. I've also been involved in high school all the way down to t-ball, youth sports, and football, but mostly baseball. And right now we have two, what I call kids from the neighborhood. They're good men. They're a long ways away from kids now. And they've even served in the military, but they're working for our company now. And I had the pleasure of working with them, and they are outstanding people. And, and, and I just love it that I found out they were friends of my, I knew them from the neighborhood, and they're friends of my sons and everything else. So it all ties up.
That's really
And
cool.
you'll have to pay me to give you their names. So.
Oh,
Well,
maybe
I'll tell you.
maybe they'll comment. Maybe they'll watch the video and they'll comment. They're out themselves online.
Yes, Brandon and Tyler know who they are.
Yeah.
They're great men, and I thought it was pretty interesting. They talked to me out loud, and then they called each other and say, "Hey, Galen's dad works for the company." You don't often hear that, especially when there's so many years, because they're actually they're your age basically. I
Yeah.
mean, you guys are about the same age, so. And that's where I have to give you credit too, and your cousin. It's still in the family that you've taken it on to keep it going, because you don't see it that much these days, especially with the size we're getting to be. So it's better you get the gray hair and lose it than me.
Well, Bobby, you've been since 1979. Then that means you could be on the 20-year wall twice. Do you think we should institute a new policy there? Get your photo twice on the?
No, matter of fact, I even said that to some of the new people. I said, "I'm on the wall," and they go, "Yeah, we saw you." I go, "Well, it doesn't look like me." No, they say you still look like that. So.
Actually, that's a good point. That's the younger photo, right? Is always the one you want to leave up on the wall.
It's good. And with some of the other people, they always mention, like in the Tri-Cities, I get calls from the guys there, and I'm actually honored that they call me, because they used to have, like, Ken Finley. He's on the wall and he's retired now, and they used to go to him for a lot of stuff, and it's kind of funny that all comes around. And even Jim Lovelace, he started with our company and Yakima on things, and he's back. He's even had his own company. And Rob Suckle, he used to work here and started his own thing down in Nevada, and he's back. So, like you said, you got to be nice to him and try to instill. This is a job where things happen that I learned from everybody else. That's why I liked your Monday morning musings. And of the ones you said, is the way I think I learned this from your grandfather. Matter of fact, I know I did. It was more about caring than anything. People could tell you care. And he used to say things like that. He said, "Just take care of the customers. And if there's some other stuff that's out of your control, let us take that on. It's not your job." Like he would say, I was worried that it wasn't priced good enough. Say, that seems to be a common thing even now. But he would say to me things like, "Hey, you just keep doing the good work. You're doing a good job. If we're not charging enough, let us fix that. And that's our job," and things like that. And it's and it's things you don't often appreciate. And sometimes it's so subtle you don't even know it
Yeah.
unless someone points it out to you. It's like sociology. You didn't even know it was a science because it's about us.
Well, I mean, I was doing a presentation with one of my esteemed colleagues, Jared Wallace, who's been up here, and we were talking about using that phrase, take care of, because it's such an important phrase. And the converse of that would be to deal with. And I mean, in that, while we were giving the presentation, we slipped and used the phrase deal with, because once you make the mental change to deal with, you're no longer taking care of somebody or something. And I think I didn't realize that my grandfather used to say that. I've heard my dad say it a million times.
Yes, and not only did they say it, they lived it. And even recently, um, I get picked for some of these things that are going to take a little more time than usual. And sometimes some of the other staff say, well, we can't spend as much time as you do and things like that. Well, a lot of these things, it just takes more effort and you don't have the time. That's why you got to rely on some of the people to back you up. And one thing, because when I started, we didn't have these low impact items. Matter of fact, when we started using them, people say we want something that smells and things like that. But to make a long story short on that, if you can show them you care, because they actually said things like this: "You seem to be the only company that cares." It was hard to get rid of ants and things like that because even back then we couldn't go into where sick people were, and we didn't want to cause more stress or harm than that. So we would get a lot of callbacks to things, and I thought of callbacks as failures. But then one time, the staff there pointed out, "You have a really good company. Anytime we call you with something, you come out and you spend the time and you educate and things like that." And when he said you always come out, I always thought I started apologizing. "Hey, I'm sorry, your carpenter ants are still dropping from the ceiling a month later after we treated," because back then, um, the staff member said you probably used chlordine. We had that. That was our termidor back in the day. We used it for termites, but it had a causative effect on everything else.
Mm.
And so it worked pretty good. And not only did we, like I said, not only did we use it, we used to use it a lot, and then it got banned for everything but termites. But yes, but I thought of it as a failure, and they taught me that just caring and showing up and doing what you said is the paramount thing, because I learned that from the other people that worked here, not just your dad, but one of the technician that I worked with in Olympia. He would always say, "Don't be afraid to call us if you still got a problem. We've been in business a long time. We take care of our customers." And your dad would always say the same thing, because we used to sell a lot of pesticides too. But instead of using them, he would say, "Hey, we provide a service. It doesn't cost that much. We can take care of you, and you'll like our people." Uh, and that was his whole line. And I learned a lot from him just by putting yourself in the customer spot, because customer is king, and the client, you just got to care. That's why I think some of the terms we used to use, like signature care, not only is it taking care, but the care and prescription care, things like that. That's a good word.
So your name has long been associated with training. It seemed like you were the go-to person for all questions and still are. When did that start for you? When did it suddenly begin that you were starting to train other people? How did training become such a big part of your life and career?
Well, we didn't have a big technical department because we all started out, like I said, back then, especially. I'm thinking it's still the same thing. I used to do what Ashley does, but she has taken another level because no offense, she's a bigger nerd than anybody I know in our company. There's a couple other ones. I'm naming names, Alyssa. If you're watching this, you're right up there. I'm one of your fans. And yes, I did use chlordane. You name it, I use it. That's why I don't have to read about it. But that being said, that's when I was picked to help do the training with Jeff, because he couldn't go to. We started having other offices when I started. We didn't really have an office in Olympia, but we got one. Your aunt ran. I thought she ran it she used to do our paper and things like that. In our marketing was done by all your two of your aunts basically, and some of the artwork too. And she ran the Bremerton office. We had people there, and then of course Randy Warner started working there too. But in Olympia, we didn't even have a building, but we had a lot of customers. We had at that time probably 300 monthly things, because of not only that, some of our sister companies had health problems and literally deaths. So we took over the companies there so they wouldn't falter. And we had their ex-employees. I'm talking about, we had ABC with Jack Weaver. We had Ed Atchison with RD Pest Control. And his dad literally was killed on the job. And Ed had a bunch of heart attacks. And we got most of the customers we got were in our area down south. And as we grew, usually someone like me, that's why I like Spokane the best, because they already had a company there. Whereas when we started in Oregon, I was the Oregon guy. When we started going to Idaho, I was, that's where I love Larry Casey. You don't know how much I like people. People say, why do you keep thanking me? Well, when we started in Boise, we had basically had one person, and he was a salesman, and we had one customer too. Matter of fact, that's how we got to most places through Copasan. Was we got started with a big Copasan client. Same story in Utah. We had one big customer we had to take care of, so we had to start an office there. And so I got really involved in some of them. Most of them are still our clients today. So like Rick Peliquin in Seattle there in Tukwila, he always goes, it's kind of funny. He says, you seem to know every customer and they know you. I don't, and I'm going, well, some of them know me, but I've been to most of them before. I'm not afraid to talk to anybody either. That's where you find out what's going on.
Well, yeah. And Bob, you're known as one of the good talkers at the organization, I would say.
I'll be silent now. It's interesting. Like I said, I've known you your whole life, and I've known your parents for a long time. So
yeah, you've known them almost since they were married. I mean, you just right afterwards.
I knew Larry before he's married, actually. He used to go to England a lot. So
huh.
Oh, I'm going to go to Fissions to see where they make FICAM. And I'd go, I've talked to your mother. And she used to run the company, really, a lot of it, because we had two-way radios, a mobile system, and she had a base at her house too. We had one at the office when I started, and sometimes she got involved. We had trucks stolen, and she tried to talk people into bringing them back and things like that. There's a lot of good stories. If I write a book, you're done. You're done. You're toast.
Well, tell me what it was like to be dispatched by radio.
Well, the interesting thing is we used a 10 code just like the police did. And we'd have to go 10-8 when we were going to lunch or something like that. But usually we all went to lunch together, like at your uncle's house or something like that. And I go, well, where's Bob? He goes, oh, we're not telling Bob about this. I'm going, why not? I had lunch at his house yesterday. Because that's the kind of value he said. He goes, you're married and you're going to have some kids. And I recommend you try to spend at least one meal a day, because he worked hard and worked a lot. And so did everybody. But he said, but he worked 24/7 sometimes. And he was always down there helping me, because he took on a lot of customers. And he goes, you got to go home now, because you have to have at least one meal a day with your family. And you don't hear that from the boss often, things like that. So I keep referring to him, because they're the ones taught me when you talk about the training. If you don't know how to do it, you can call me and talk to me, but it's better to learn how to do it, either demonstration or doing it itself. But I can usually tell you not to do something, or if you're on the right track, because I've seen it. If I haven't screwed it up myself, I've seen it screwed up. And some of this stuff can be pretty serious too. I mean, you have to take the serious side. But that's where I fall back on your dad, because I used to fumigate with him and some other things. And so, but we always had to have lunch, and sometimes we had to go home and see the family. And since I was with him, I went to lunch with your dad a lot at the house. We had our Christmas parties there too.
Well, so we sometimes when we look back at the past, we remember mostly the good things. What were some of
Mhm.
the hard things to get through that you faced?
Well, the hard things was like for me, I was alone most of the time. I still had backup. Like I said, your dad helped me, and so did Ed Atchison. Ed had his leg cut off, but he went with me to a lot of these things and introduced me and things like that. That was kind of a hardship, but the hardest ship was we had other guys working for us, and the bad times where we were at doing a large chicken farm account, and we just didn't take care of the process, and we went in the farms, and it's hard to describe, but the chickens are literally up 15 feet high, and they only empty them out every 2 years. And when I mean empty them out, I don't mean just take the chickens. That's the stuff would literally be over your head and things like that. And that's how we got them as customers. The rats, when they had them empty, they decided to put cement floors in and they were destroying the cement coming up through. Those were hard accounts. Those were the hardships. The hardships were you have to really show you care, but you have to think about who else is going to see what you're doing because a lot of things are emotional, especially when we're starting to deal with birds and some of the other things. We're in an industry that's easily picked on. We're still fairly small, so we don't have a lot of political power or backing. We always go hat in hand to, like I say, our senators and things like that. They even have their own EPA liaisons and things like that because we lose a lot of court battles. You don't know what's been fought already. For a while, it looked like we were going to have to give everybody notice if we treated anything within a 120-foot radius of where we were going to apply any pesticides. That would have been a real hardship if we couldn't get that changed. And you've lived some of these yourself, so you
Mhm.
know what not to do a lot yourself. And 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 learn from us. Like I said, I don't make these phrases up that you hear from me, but I love to pass them on. And one of them is, if you're having trouble, get some help, get some advice. Don't do the dumbest thing you can think of because it's easier to fix before you screw it up. Isn't that right, Ross?
There's always someone to ask. For instance, we could ask you.
Well, I don't have all the answers, but usually I ask a lot of questions and it helps to stimulate the thought that maybe we shouldn't do certain things. And I still remember Jim Lovelace backing me up one time. We were fumigating a large bakery and had basically back then they used to have a lot of linoleum floors and they also had these tile floors that were made out of, well, it was a petroleum product. And I seen enough screw ups, they were going to just take the bottles in there and let them go. I'm going, well, if you've never replaced these floors before, you won't do that. I mean, we've done it where we've had to try to flatten floors with trucks and forklifts and everything else. So sometimes you spend an extra half hour protecting things in there, then that saves several $1,000s worth of damage and replacement. Same thing happened, you lived through the heating things. You've seen the pain we had.
Sure.
And you saw me, I wasn't as big an advocate as everybody else on some of this stuff. If you use direct fire, you're going to pay. We used to use heat before. This people that said they invented stuff, it would crack me up because your dad, when we go do the bed bug jobs, you know what his mantra was?
What's that?
Turn the heat up and treat.
Interesting.
Yeah, you didn't know that, did you? It was
No,
even quoted in the newspaper.
the heat would get things more active.
Oh yeah, because back in the day, and even now, the regular heating system in say units and things, you can get them up pretty hot to in the 90s at least if you utilize that. Even when we started heat treatment, one of our managers that we had, he still works with Copasan. He used to get mad at me. I go, "What are you doing? You had those little heaters that would pop. They even
Yeah.
did them in the office here. They pop all the things." I said, "Turn the heat up before we get in here." And he goes, "Well, I don't think that's right. We're using their heaters." Well, it's the same power. That they're not going to care. It's going to be the same thing off their drawing because I personally don't like pulling the stove out and plugging into a pigtail and having a big uh, reducer. I'm kind of lazy that way. I like to heat it up good because you're right. They start moving first. You have to get the environment. I'm not that one. I learned that from your dad
Hmm.
and your grandfather especially. He goes, when we have all these roaches and things, get it nice and hot. Uh, it made the bed bugs be active. Matter of fact, a lot of times I didn't even think they moved the first year or two I worked here. It wasn't until I went with your dad and we had all this stuff, and your grandfather was there too, and we had to do several of them at a time, turn the heat up. But they had full of bed bugs and roaches. We had a high fog. We just it was a big tank on our back, and it was had a 900 psi cylinder that compressed it, but the roaches and the bed bugs too. It seemed like you just pointed at them and they started running. It was like the old-fashioned Raid commercials. If anyone, you know, you hear all cockroaches don't fly, German cockroaches. Well, they try to fly when you're in there, jumping and fluttering out.
Well, you've mentioned a few of my family members, but who else? Who else had an impact on your career, or did you enjoy working with over your
Oh,
40 years?
and even though she's kind of related to you by proxy, Betty Bader,
Oh
and
yeah.
of course Art Bader, Aunt Betty. Yes, but I learned a lot from her. Matter of fact, when we started growing, someone said, "Who do you think ought to be the manager here or manager there?" And I, I'm sorry, I picked your grandmother a bunch of times, but then I just started saying, "Well, Betty, and Aunt Betty, and to you CSRs out there, what do we call them now? Some
BACs.
the people that run the offices. We have such a the people like I can't think of anybody that's I could say anything negative. They are so good. I can't believe how good a job the people that actually are in those offices running them. Because it's a hard job because you're between the customers, people like us in corporate and their own people. That's a tough job, and they are so good at it. And that from the people, and it's kind of funny because you start out saying down there in Bakersfield, and they have the staff down there. And next thing you know, I'm dealing with one of the same gals right there in Medford, and it just was fantastic. And they keep track of you. They hold you accountable. Not only do they help you, don't get me wrong, they help you great, but they push you too. I mean, they can't do it. The people that are great managers is because they have great support staff behind them, and I can't thank them enough. I learned a lot from them. Some of them don't even work there anymore. But when I did the training, well, especially when we got the PDAs, I used to make the new guys train me, but then sometimes they weren't even they weren't too hot about it. So back then, let's go use the old term. Like in the Seattle office, I used to have 4 people. Go, what's going on with these reports? It looked like a rookie did it. And I just smile. I go, yeah, that's because they did it. I let them do all the work. You got to make a few mistakes. I cleaned it up enough that it was, but that was my style. Like I
Yeah.
used to do Ashley's job. And so after the classes, I would get a lot of phone calls and things. But we
Well, when
used
I
to,
was a technician too, I mean, Billy in Tacoma was just she would be my guide. She'd be the one that keep me out of trouble. And Shelly in Spokane, same thing. She would,
exactly.
yep.
And the funny thing is, we had 2 gals in Spokane. One of them was the niece of a friend of mine that became at that time it was the game department. And she asked me if I knew Kurt, and I go, well, yeah, I know him pretty good. So the funny thing is, they did such a good job of organizing people. You hear about things. They even made, you know how we make maps and things up. This isn't new. They even made, and they held the technicians accountable to put these things. They had to make them maps of everything, and to contact people, and they had notebooks for them. They had a copy. And those are things we learned from the other offices, and it's it was a great idea. I wasn't always able to get it instituted like even when we have our pictures in the logbooks. I said, well, in Spokane and in Tri-Cities and stuff, they have everybody's picture in there already, so we don't make a mistake and not having your picture in there and getting a QA screw up. When I tried to do it here, they said, Bob Andrews said to do this. Well, I didn't say to do it. I said, that's what they do. So I would take the flack a little bit. It wasn't my idea, but if it gets somebody in trouble, I'll be the one that gets in trouble for it. I'll take it.
Oh, Bob, for some reason, trouble never sticks to you. I don't know what it is.
Well, I try to do the right thing all the time. I try to think about how the customer would feel, and because not only that, the other people involved, you don't want to make things worse. Sometimes it's like first aid. You learn things. I don't know what your background is in emergency response or anything. I used to work with Civil Air Patrol and things like that. And for first aid, sometimes you got to find out. Remember, in pest control, the I in integrated pest management really means inspection. That comes first. Don't sweat it till you know what's going on. And even then, sometimes you have to tell yourself, let's not do something right now. I'm uncertain. Let's get help. And that's the way it is in first aid. If you've done nothing wrong, you're right. You know, if because if you've done nothing, you've done nothing wrong. Because you don't want to make the situation worse.
Hmm. Yeah.
And we're as an industry, you're young, you've seen it, you're old enough to have seen how the perceptions of our industry can change, and we don't want to be on that picture. And it's the same thing with our brother companies and estates and associations. Sure, they may do some things different as you don't agree, but you don't have to advertise it that much because we're all in the same boat. It's better to try to change it through your state and even our country associations. That's where I've been lucky enough. I've been here long enough. I've got to be the president of the state association. I've been everything in all the associations. I'm still in charge of conflicts, which I don't like being in charge of. Mainly because it's fighting amongst different companies.
Mm.
And sometimes they call the state and they say that's not their deal. And so some of these people call me. And it is some of the stuff they want me to do is the state's job too. But I just tell the people, that I'll talk to them and people involved. That's usually where it ends with me.
So over your 41 years, sorry, I don't want to short you a year.
Doesn't matter. You can say 10.
What are some of the more funny situations you found yourself in?
Oh, lots of funny ones, and they always seem to happen with some other things. And so we may have to have a separate section on that. But the funniest things where people used to make fun of me was the chicken farms. Like at the Christmas parties and stuff, we exchanged gifts. I always got a pair of stilts or something like that. And then we always had people that talked more than me, if you can believe it or not. They would get cans of certain things. But the funny things that have happened are it's the same trouble we have now. When we go to places, they're not really ready, they're not even prepared, they don't even know we're coming. So you get to see the most interesting things. But if you go there often enough, they become part of your family and you can work with them as individuals. You don't even have to really go through their managers and stuff. You can get them to cooperate with you if you can tell them things like that. But they become your friends and you see them later on. Like I talk about these chicken farms a lot. Just had a guy that, well, I shouldn't say just because it was back in February, but his name was Virgil Page. I didn't recognize him. He was in here talking to somebody and I came in and he goes, "Hey, you're the Rat Man." And I couldn't remember him, but he was one of the farmers that I used to take care of because I had about probably 75 chicken farms and dairy farms tied together. And I spent a lot of evenings with them and they would invite you in for dinner and everything else. I mean, that's the kind of things would happen, especially if we're working late with them. Because we used to do some funny things like people say, "See all the rats I caught?" And then your dad would show up with this cyanide dust. "You got a lot of rats under there. Everybody clear out, get way back." He'd puff the dust. And what do you think now when about 25, 30 rats come out choking and coughing and, for the next half hour more would. And that's kind of comical because now we're like some kind of pest control gods.
Yeah, the Pied Pipers. What are some of the things in your career that you're thankful for?
Well, I'm thankful for just the relationships. I've got to meet a lot of people, not just our customers. I bring that up a lot because when some places I went to for 20, 30 years, but not only that, the people I work with, I'm thankful for that. And not only that, like we talk about, I'm just grateful that your dad, we would get together at his house. He was always grateful enough to have everybody in the whole company and even other people from other companies and would be there. And it was like good that I was thankful to meet right there, but and things like that. But what I'm really thankful of that I'm able to be able to pass some of the passion on. Like that's what Alfie used to ask, like the training class first thing, did they know that Sprague passionately delivers uncompromising service? That was always the first thing he would ask. And I'd even put it on the notebook cover. And I said, if he asks you that, just look down there, but they'd still choke and things like that. But I was thankful for all the people I have known. Some of them are gone now. And maybe I'll someday, with the help of your father, we'll put together a memorial board or something, but I'm thankful for all the customers and people that I've met. But it's mainly because I learned how the world really works, and we're invited into the bowels of everything, and also the highest esteemed places. Like,
Well, I mean, usually, Bob, I can hear you coming outside my window. I hear you whistling on your way in, and then I hear you doing your check-ins as you come through the building. I mean, this is, pre-pandemic, but you would talk to everyone. It would take you a while to get back here.
well, I used to be afraid of your uncle, and I'd always say things like, I don't want him doing this anymore. How do I look today? You know, did I shave and things like that? If I ever came to the office, and since especially in the beginning, I worked in Olympia, but if someone ever left the door like, "Hey, were you in the office this morning?" I'm going, no. And besides, you got an alarm on there. I don't know. I don't know the alarm. Even when one of your uncles got married one time, I couldn't get in the office, and I didn't know the thing, and I had to go to Tommy's wedding just to get the key from your grandfather, and then I came back, and it had they changed the code, so I had to go back, and from your dad I had to get the new code. So I went to the wedding and the reception.
That's hilarious, Bob. That's hilarious. Hey, you were at my wedding.
Yes, and the funny thing is, I still remember that everybody came up, including yourself. You came right to where I was stuffing things in my mouth and introduced me to your lovely wife, and I really appreciated that, and so did some of the sales staff in your Seattle office and things like that. That's some of the things I'm really thankful for, getting to know the other families and the kids and their families and things. And that's why I brought up the things about the kids that I knew from the neighborhood. I didn't know them that well, but I made them tell me their background, and then you find out you actually know them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Small world.
But there's a lot of things to this job, and we had people from various colleges and our sales staff, and one of them, they said, well, I decided to stay, and they stayed a long time, and they'd even compliment me, and they'd say, I didn't know this was the type of field was so as technical as it was so technical, and it's getting more technical. Even yesterday, I called this a representative of one of our, he's not our supplier, but they make a product that controls rat through birth control. Well, we've used it. I still have some in the back of my truck. And I just said, well, we'll talk it over with our staff. And he couldn't believe that we already had experience with it. So that's where I'm thankful that we're tied into it. That your dad and Alfie had to, has us involved at the top edge of all these things. And someone like me, what I'm really thankful for was I got to meet the giants of the industry of our time. Norm Eamon, you probably remember him. He was our our main trainer, and he would show us pesticides, how to learn about pesticides using the Muppets and things like that. And we had, now that we have Richard here, and Richard Hausman, one of his professors at Texas A&M, also used to teach us about toxicology, and he was a leader in his field. And Jojo Okamura, who was the head entomologist for California Department of Agriculture, his son lived here, so we saw him all the time. And what I really liked about him was he would teach someone like me, and I'd make all these collections for him, working day and night. I even got my wife doing the lettering on these slides, and she had beautiful lettering and everything. And it was part of the class, and we learned a lot by putting these collections and stuff together. And they were paying, Larry paid for me to go to the school with them. And this is before Jeff Weir worked here. And then the best part was all these collections I made. He always sold your dad one too. I like that. And some of you have seen the big display pictures that we have of the large insects and things. We put those together with Corey Chantry, and he's with another company, but he's an entomologist too. And we would sell those for fundraisers for our state association. And I got involved in that and got to meet everybody in the industry there. But your dad would also buy those. And sometimes they were getting bid up by the other companies because your dad wouldn't let them have them.
Yeah, well, there's a few of them hanging around here, I think.
But like I said, and I got to go to Purdue a lot. I mean, a lot. I got to go to Washington, D.C. just because I'm basically a pest control person. We're not supposed to call ourselves exterminators, even though a lot of people do still say that. This is the things that I'm so grateful for. They gave me the opportunity. I've gotten to go to Orlando and go to all the universities, the University of Florida, Gainesville, Richard Kramer. We saw his professor there, and they're the ones that started out the insect growth regulators from the ground up. And there's even a gal up that you worked for the University of Washington still here, and she's pretty old too. She's in her 90s, and they were on the ground floor developing these things. They used to call it the Wonder Golden Liquid, and that was the first IGRs. And these insect growth regulators were the actual things that they were analogs of what the insects made. So I got to see those people and meet them. John V. Osmond. People go, ooh, he was the first person in the Environmental Protection Agency. They only know him from that. And I go, no, he was our godfather of pest control, but at Purdue. So he was basically the general manager of the EPA when it first started, or what we would call an operations manager. So you get to meet those guys, Bobby Corrigan and things like that. I can name a lot of names. And most of you that are listening to this have had classes from them. Yeah. And we have good relationships with everybody like that. We're not just sitting there to be sold something, to use this, use that.
No, there's a lot of training that comes from our partners in this industry. I mean, I know that some people refer them as vendors, but they've been partners to us because they help us with so many different things and trainings and making us better as an organization.
Yeah, they're stewards of the industry, and some of them have giant names like Dow, BASF, and that's why we go with them anyway, because they support us in our industry. It isn't sure once these things you lose, basically these molecules, they basically are, they have a copyright, trademark, all this stuff. They have only a short life to make their money back. But once they do, they get over the counter and other things. Sure, we could buy from the cheapest vendor, or cheapest manufacturer, but we lose our contact with them, so they can show us. We're right at the ground level of some of this stuff. Like, we were the first ones in the country to use a chitin inhibitor basically for termites and things. Matter of fact, we used it at your house. You were live. I'll call it your house. First thing out of their mouth, since these are insect growth regulators and we got to get the termites to eat it first thing out of their mouth is, hey, have you ever used any pesticides at this house and stuff like that? And I'm sitting there going, and I'm going, and then your dad says, no, not really. I'm going, yeah, some places, maybe we ought to use it on the house where I call it the guest house. Let's start there first. You do own a pest control company. You can't tell the guy from Dow that you have never used pesticides.
Well, Bob, any final thoughts today as we wrap up here?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you again for keeping this a multi-generational company. There's a reason that AJ's called AJ and your dad was called Bob. It's because they have the same names, things like that. And Alpha, of course.
Yeah.
It's because their name is the same. It's just got a different number after.
Yeah.
Where I'm going to tell a little secret here, and I hope you don't mind. You can edit this out.
It's okay.
If you don't know Ross too well, or his sister, you can call them by their initials. And Ross's is Rat. That's all you need to know. And his sister is Ant. And there's no U in her Ant.
Yes, it was done on purpose. It was done on purpose.
And if you want your training notebook, I still have it.
You still have it?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, if you find that would be amazing. That would have been June of 2000. That would be spectacular.
Yeah. And thank you for allowing me to work here so long. I try my best to be a true advocate for our industry, but I honestly believe that even though we've grown a lot, sure, we got a lot of problems and growing pains like anything else, but it can be worked out. There's nothing stopping anybody from coming here and talking to you if you're here. And stuff may be a little harder with COVID and stuff. Heaven knows the guys across the alley, or which are close, some of them need the most talking to, but they usually come and complain to you first, so you can talk about the same issue and stuff.
Oh, come on. I got a special relationship with the Tacoma office. They,
Well,
I'm one of them.
they really do.
Yeah.
And even before you were at the corporate office,
Yeah.
the people they're still here. There's nothing stopping someone from contacting you and things like
Yeah.
that.
No, and even some people are super helpful and come over and help me with problems in my own house. So
Well, that's to be expected. People work here and they have the same problems that anybody else does. And when the, I don't know what you call the people office now, I call it HR, they have regular problems, and I'll wait until their boss asks me to go, but usually I don't wait that long. We'll talk about it, have something going on, because you can't have the people that work here have problems with things that we take care of. And
yeah,
that's I mean, they can have those problems, but we can remedy them. It's just like
absolutely.
when we opened this building, we had the thing going on. It used to be a plumbers and steam fitters union hall. And the first time it rained, he goes, "Yeah, we got other problems here besides floods. They flooded out the animals before we really got moved in, and thankfully."
Oh, jeez. I didn't even know about that story. There's always stories I don't know.
Biological Patrol. I took some pictures of a raptor that hangs around here. I'll copy you on the email before I send it to Richard and Bobby or some of our new
Cool.
people on the technical staff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, that thank you goes two ways. You've been an incredible inspiration to this organization, an incredible trainer. You've done so many different things. You've helped me and everyone else in our careers, and just thank you. That thank you goes two ways.
Well, don't be afraid to ask me to do something, because I probably will.
Well,
Thank you, Ross.
well, thanks, Bob. You have a wonderful day today.
I love my name, Robert R. Andrews.
Well, it's one of the many names that you've been given over the years.
Yes, sir.